All right, good evening, everybody. We are back. So happy. We're in week 12. I hope you had a great break. Hope you're able to get stuff done, see people, do things. So this week, we're doing community organizing. We're talking about community organizing with Akeisha Lee, and we will also have a bit of a foreword. I guess it'd be a foreword if it was a book from Anna, who's like an OG of Epidemics of Injustice. So we're really glad that she's also here. So I'm going to share my screen. As always, share my screen, and then we will get into the presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will take one or two questions off camera at the end, and then we will read the rest from the chat. So just letting you all know, thank you so much. Okay, start the slideshow. So welcome to Epidemics of Injustice. This year's theme is co-disruption for collective liberation in public health. So please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and your pronouns. Complete the check-in form. You can scan the QR code or go to this link. During the presentations, please put comments or questions in the chat, and there'll be time for questions at the end. This is how you do the Zoom controls: mute, start video, and chat. The course instruction team and teaching assistants, that would be Katie, Nandini, and myself, Washika Torres. So the course is an annual course free and open to the public, and it prepares public health leaders and community members with the tools to bring about social change and address structural determinants of health. All course meetings will take place virtually, and the course is open to students and the general public from 5:30 to 6:30 CST, and then students who are taking the course for credit will stay from 6:30 to 7:30 for a closed discussion. Epidemics of Injustice is sponsored by the Collaboratory for Health Justice at the USC School of Public Health. And we'd also like to thank the Radical Public Health for the creation, support, and promotion of this program. RPH is celebrating its 11th year. And for more information about RPH, please go to their Facebook page at facebook.com/Radical Public Health. So a little bit of a content warning. Today's lecture contains materials that might be difficult to discuss. Please step away if you need to take care of yourself during the presentation. So the Collaboratory for Health Justice acknowledges that the University of Illinois Chicago resides on the traditional territories of the three fire peoples, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, purchased after 2.5 years of open warfare, decades of violent encroachment, and the defeat of a pan-Indian movement to keep settlers out of the Great Lakes region at the Treaty of Chicago in 1821, receiving their final payment before moving westward in 1835. The area was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other Native tribes. The state of Illinois is currently home to more than 75,000 tribal members, and the Chicagoland area is home to one of the largest and most diverse urban Native communities in the U.S. Illinois is also the territory of the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Anoka, Menominee, Sac, Fox, and their descendants. By making a land acknowledgement, we recognize that Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the land that we now occupy, living here long before Chicago was a city and still thriving here today. As we work, live, and play on these territories, we must ask what we can do to right the historic wrongs of colonialization and state violence and support Indigenous community struggles for self-determination and sovereignty. So please show up on time and come prepared. Let everyone participate, listen with an open mind, have mutual respect and appreciation for one another, respect the privacy and personal information shared during class. Today's speaker is Ms. Akeisha Lee, and she was speaking about community safety and community organizing. Akeisha Lee, who's a she, her pronouns, is sole South Suburban Community and Congressional Organizer. Akeisha is from the South suburbs of Chicago, and she credits her early passion for mutual aid and human dignity to her upbringing in church. The church exposed Akeisha to the power of community and the importance of caring for our neighbors. She comes to this work after earning a master's in public health from St. Louis University. While completing her studies, Akeisha engaged in student and community efforts to expand Medicaid in Missouri and address racial health disparities in St. Louis City. At Soul, Akeisha plans to create campaigns that challenge us to imagine a society where we are all safe, housed, supported, and treated with dignity. Outside of her work, Akeisha enjoys creative activities like theater, singing, and writing. Stop the share. And like I said, we're going to have a brief word from Anna, and then we will go into our presentation with Akeisha. Thank you so much.
And good evening, everybody. My name is Anna Yankolev. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an alumna of the UIC School of Public Health and a facilitator with Radical Public Health. I was one of the original creators of Epidemics of Injustice in its first year, 6 years ago, which is hard to believe. And when we created this class, we really wanted to help inform and equip students and community members with the knowledge and skills that they needed to be effective change agents in their communities. And so something that many of you have learned in your classes is the impact that policy has on our health, lives, and well-being. And so being able to impact and to help control the narrative and the output of the policy that happens in our legislation on the, whether that's the local, state, or national level, is a really important element of public health. So I'm really excited to have a community organizer come and speak with us all today, because the skills that Akeisha is going to be talking about and the process that she's going to describe, these are transferable skills that can be applied to political advocacy needs across the spectrum, whether that is about increasing access to health benefits, whether that is about abortion access, whether that's about immigration. So these are really transferable skills. And I encourage you all to listen with an open heart and to think about what you can do to help build power, to help organize in your local communities around this issue. And I will close just by saying that we are in Chicago. We have a big municipal election happening next week. A lot of organizers like Akeisha and many thousands of people across the city have been working really hard to do exactly what Akeisha is going to be talking about, to make sure that we are building the power that we need to have the leadership and the policies necessary to keep our communities safe and healthy. And I'll pause there and hand it over to Akeisha.
Thank you so much. Hey, y'all, I'm Akeisha. I'm a little tired today. I've been out canvassing all day, which I'll be talking about today, so it's really appropriate. Feel free to come as you need to come, right? Like, have your cameras on or off, whatever I usually do. But I do love to see engagement and that I'm landing with y'all. So I might say, does that make sense? And I guess it'd be awkward if no one's nodding. So yeah, just let me know. Okay, I also have a tendency to talk a little fast. So if I am talking too fast, give me a little something, something, let me know. I'll try to slow it down. Okay. Trying to share my screen. Okay. Hopefully you all see the PowerPoint. Y'all see it, right?
Yes, we do.
Great. Okay, cool. So first, talk about who is SOUL. So I work for Southsiders Organized for Unity and Liberation, also known as SOUL. I am now their lead organizer. I've been promoted since I wrote that bio. So I oversee much of the decarceration work throughout SOUL's portfolio rather. My work primarily focuses on the Pretrial Fairness Act, ACT-CJ, and the Budget for Black Lives campaign, but I also do some work around environmental justice and through our C4 affiliate, some work around the election currently happening. Okay, so who is SOUL? So that's me doing a little protest. So SOUL is a faith-based organization. We feel that our faith calls us to action. We were founded in 2006 with a handful of congregations and community groups. But SOUL is now a multi-issue grassroots power-building organization. I'll talk more about what each of those mean if people don't know. And we work to address issues impacting the South Side and South suburban communities specifically. But a lot of our work has pushed us to expand what it means to impact the South Side. We used to be hyper local, but now we're seeing that things that happen all across Illinois deeply impact our communities. Okay, so our mission is to bring together faith leaders, community members to build power in the Southland and then leverage the power to fight for our own liberation. We define power as organized people and organized money. So we achieve this mission by partnering with congregations, community groups, student groups, and everyday passionate people. We do trainings about discipline and organizing strategies. We build relationships, we build leaders, we try to impact policy. And we engage in direct action all the time. Okay. So yeah, we fight for what our community wants, right? So all of our campaigns start off as just one person or maybe a group of people having a problem. So Water for All, for example, that's our environmental justice work. That started because the office, so I work from home, but our office is in Pullman. And Pullman, like many South Side neighborhoods, has unaffordable water debt. So people that were working in our office were like, even with my salary now, I cannot afford my water debt. And Pullman is one of those communities that has unmetered water. So we started like diving deeper into that just with the goal of being like, how do we get this water more affordable? And it kind of expanded into a whole campaign where we're talking about not just water affordability, but also access and clean water, lead pipes, all these things come from just one community's issue. The Pretrial Fairness Act, again, similar. It started off with us just getting phone calls, people saying like, oh, my loved one can't get out of jail because of an unaffordable bond. And first we thought, oh, we'll be working on lowering bond. But it turned out that bond was never low enough for some communities. And now with the statewide act, the budget for Black Lives, that came out of where our communities are. So our communities on the South Side and South suburbs were again, same. All they had was incarceration. They didn't have enough access to comprehensive care, like mental health services, childcare services, housing, quality jobs, upper momentum, things like that. And we just take it from one example. And then we have affirming care for trans folks in Cook County Jail. Again, this came from a phone call that we received. We met a trans woman who was in Cook County Jail and inappropriately being detained in the male unit within Cook County. From her story, we learned that it was not just her. There were about 13 other women who were locked up in the same conditions, and their only option for ensuring their safety was to go into solitary confinement. And I'm sure that you all know solitary confinement has long-lasting impacts on the person after they're released from prison, but also really just diminishes their quality of life while incarcerated. Okay, so our current strategies. We do teach-ins, we do lots of canvassing, we do press conferences, letters to the editor, social media materials, we combat misinformation. But today I'm gonna talk about community canvassing because that is how we stay abreast to what the community currently wants and how our current actions are landing within the community. Okay, so some big wins this year. We passed the Pretrial Fairness Act, and then we also were able to deeply engage directly impacted residents in the canvassing work. We define directly impacted usually as people who have been to prison, but we've also expanded that to folks whose like families in prison, etc. Okay, so first off, what is community organizing? So, community organizing is a process of bringing together members of a community to work towards a common interest. And some key parts of that is figuring out what the common interest is. COVID-19 has really impacted our ability to engage our community and has kind of flipped on its head the strategies we usually use to find community. Okay, so how does that work with the Pretrial Fairness Act? So first, in Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice, as a coalition mobilized thousands of people across the state to end cash bail in Illinois. Starting in 2023, people will no longer be held pre-trial because they cannot afford to pay for access to justice. And that's kind of our hope right now. We thought on January 1st, the PFA would be implemented, but it has been stalled and we are waiting for further information. Okay, so what does it do? Real quick, we say it has a couple of key accomplishments. So first, and like most notably, it abolishes money bond. It completely gets rid of the system of monetary bond in Illinois and ensures access. It ensures that access to wealth would not be the main key to someone's freedom or their detainment. It also limits eligibility for pretrial incarceration. So right now, and before the bill passed, pretrial incarceration was the default, and then people would have to go through extra hoops to be released. And it kind of swaps that. So now release will be the default and conditions will be applied as needed. It also regulates reassessment tools. Reassessment tools cannot be the sole basis for pretrial incarceration. Like many different tools, it is just a product of the creators of it. So it does have a lot of biases, predominantly against people of color. It also authorizes rules by law enforcement. So it allows the police to say, okay, this person can be stopped what they're doing with a ticket, right? Instead of having to take them all the way to jail for like a arrest and release. So it speeds up that process and kind of reduces the burden on our police force. All right. It also reduces penalties for violating pretrial release conditions. So right now our system is very punitive. So people sometimes will violate their release conditions, like their house arrest conditions, without intent. So they might get their days confused when they're supposed to be out, or like miss a bus, or have to go to the emergency room. Like all these things can happen when you can't leave your house. And instead of acting like each time is worthy of a new jail stay, it will be able to more easily define which violations are technical versus other things. It also requires reconsideration of detention and with conditions. So right now, if you're put on electronic monitoring or house arrest, you could stay there for a really long time, even if conditions have changed. So now under the new law, we'll be able to consider if with conditions are the only way to keep someone compliant with the court. And typically people's conditions can change a lot within 30 days. Okay. It also ensures credit and movement. People who are on house arrest or electronic monitoring. Under the current system, people under electronic monitoring are bound to their houses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that makes it hard for them to, do their legal requirements, maintain employment, maintain household duties, raise their children, etc. But now this will guarantee that they have certain days of guaranteed movement. It reforms the warrant process and also ensures transparency and data collection. So all of these things, all these accomplishments were created and demanded with community. We engaged people who were most directly impacted by the system and tried to figure out like what were the parts of the pretrial system that were causing them the most strife and the ones that were not actually increasing community safety. Okay, let's take a step back though. Like, why do we care in the first place, right? So, one of the things that really made our work possible in a very direct way was COVID-19. The pandemic really exemplified how much harm incarceration was causing the community. Cook County Jail, which is over in California, is one of the largest spreaders of COVID-19 in the United States, and especially here in the city of Chicago. I think it was AHA said that about 15% of cases of COVID-19 in Chicago residents can be traced through to community cycling from the jail. So whether that be people who are incarcerated being released and then picked up again, released, picked up again, or from jail personnel coming in and out of the jail. And that's largely due to overcrowding and a lack of hygiene practices within the jail. I currently do a lot of canvassing outside of the jail. Twice a week I go up there just to see how things are happening, right? And the ways that the jail is remaining compliant with what community has demanded. And the jail currently, right now, still refuses people access to soap, access to masks, access to social distancing. Because as y'all know, COVID-19 has deeply impacted communities that are more at risk for incarceration due to poverty and other factors. Okay, also outside of COVID, people generally receive poor healthcare inside of the jail. People oftentimes complain and report the jail for violating their current care plans. So people who get picked up and have disabilities have a hard time accessing what they need. People who have chronic conditions have a hard time accessing what they need. Folks who are trans are not often granted identity affirming healthcare, things like that. And then also loss of employment and just ways that the jail further destabilizes people. And as we know, when people are destabilized, they aren't able to engage fully in their community. And without that, more crime occurs, and crime is a public health issue. Okay. So currently the PFA, the Pretrial Fairness Act, is under attack. As I said before, the implementation of the PFA was stalled at the top of the year for many different reasons. Some people would say are like valid, right? The court system is in many counties are dependent upon money gained through bonds to manage their courts. People are also generally fearful of those who are incarcerated. And there's also concerns about just sweeping changes to the system. So there was a lawsuit that was put up against the Pretrial Fairness Act that deemed it to be unconstitutional, and we're currently waiting for some answers. Okay, nope. Yeah. But here in Illinois, you know, we're trying to mostly combat misinformation about the bill. The bill has kind of been swept into the overall like defunding the police conversation, but many parts of this bill are not like inherently abolitionist of prisons, right? It's mostly about creating fairness in the system and creating a better streamlining of people getting their fair trial in court. It's truly not about everyone being released from the prison. Under the PFA, certain people who commit certain crimes will still be incarcerated while waiting their trial. Okay, so what are we gonna do about it? So legislatively, we pass a trailer and try to avoid rollbacks. So some of the ways we did that is we did lobby days. So we've been engaging community members across the state. I do work in Cook County, but across the state, to inform them and their communities about the Pretrial Fairness Act. And then they expand it out into their little pods, and they expand it out to more pods. So we took about 400 people down to Springfield late last year to tell their legislators that they were indeed committed to the passage of this law. We also build our base and our power. So all the time we are trying to engage more people. Unfortunately, there was a large misinformation like campaign against the Pretrial Fairness Act, mostly because it got wrapped up into the governor's race inappropriately. A lot of people, unfortunately, the first time they were hearing about the Pretrial Fairness Act was while it was being attacked. Okay. Okay, so how do we actually do it, y'all, right? So we do it through deep canvassing. And I want y'all to try to stay with me through this. Like deep canvassing, when I was trained on it, it was kind of difficult to understand if you had never done it before. So let me just take a second and try to look at y'all. Okay, has anybody here, just show of hand, raise a hand, have any of y'all deep canvassed before? Okay, Carol has. Wow, amazing. Nope. Okay, Robert has not. LOL. Okay, so truly only a couple, and that's okay, hands down. How many of you all feel like you've been deep canvassed, like you've experienced somebody canvassing you? Raise your hand. Never even heard of the phrase. Okay, great. Okay, you have been canvassed though. Yes, love that. Okay, great. Back to sharing. So yeah, like canvassing, you may have been canvassed, not even know it. So if you're like walking down the street and somebody's like, can you stop for a second and tell me your thoughts on the environment? That's a form of canvassing, right? And it's usually around a specific issue. So usually you'll get canvassed around a candidate for mayor. Like right now, I'm sure many of you all have experienced people pamphleting you and stopping you. But deep canvassing is supposed to go a couple of steps further. So the goal of deep canvassing is not to debate facts, it's to exchange stories and try to process complicated feelings, because we feel like that's the thing that truly moves people towards a change in action or a change in like ideology. But oftentimes, if you're debating people with facts, we have the confirmation biases, right? We have defensiveness. It's not going to get them. Okay. So typically, it looks like many different touches, right? So a first touch might be at someone's door. You ask them like what their top priorities are for their community, right? Or if they even like, or if they feel safe. It can be very, very broad. So typically when I was doing canvassing for the PFA and Budget for Black Lives, I would often say, do you feel safe in your community? And that kind of thing sometimes takes folks aback because they aren't often asked like how they feel in their homes and like that. And then you try to listen for like through line. So somebody might say, oh, well, I feel safe in my home, but I don't feel safe around the corner at the corner store. And at first you might get like some talking point type of responses like, oh yes, because there's no cops. It's because Brayway and whatever are selling drugs in my corner. Then as you dive deeper and you ask them like, what are they doing to combat the safety concerns, right? What are they doing to respond to their community? You usually get things like they're already engaged in a block club, and you try to help them identify where and how they can increase the things that cause them to feel more safe and try to decrease the practices that are actually taking away from what they need to see in their community. Okay. So again, we train canvassers to listen and ask open-ended questions. We train them to not debate people on the doors, because once again, they're giving us their time, and it can be a bit vulnerable to share what you think with a total stranger. We teach them how to build rapport and how to be comfortable exchanging vulnerable stories, right? Teaching canvassers how to identify the parts of their story that cause them to align with our campaigns in the first place. And that's called personal interest. And understanding someone's personal interest can be a key indicator in like flipping them. And then we hope that the impact of deep canvassing lasts 6+ months, right? And then we come back around again and repeat it again. Okay. So I think at this point, I would like to know what questions have come up. Because again, it's the kind of thing that can be hard to explain. And look at the chat.
If anyone would like to come off mic and ask a question right now, then that would be great. Yeah. If you have any, if not, we do have time at the end for some questions. So don't worry if you don't have one now or you're still formulating, we will have time in about 15 or so minutes.
Yeah. Okay, I can say more about why this matters, right? If anyone has questions.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'd be great.
Akeisha, this is Anna. Not so much a question, so much as, because there's a lot of folks on this call that have not had experience with canvassing or are unfamiliar with it. Can you just kind of map out the progress or the progression from canvassing to getting a policy in place and how that impacts people? Like why is canvassing a part of policy change?
Yeah, yes. Okay, great. So for so many different reasons. So first, a lot of times those who have political power, elected officials, are out of touch, I think, with what people want within their base. So, like for example, my legislator has been largely an ally for the PFA, but some folks around my district have not been. So a great way to get the legislators to shift is to show just how many people would care. And unfortunately, legislators only care about those who are willing to vote and can potentially make them lose their job. So with canvassing, we first try to develop people's analysis or like their stance on the issue through many touches. And then from that, we deepen the relationship and bring them into like maybe a train the trainer and help them feel empowered to talk about why the issues impact them, but to the community. And then after canvassing, we might bring a group of community members, talk to their legislator and just raise some issues with them about how they're maybe talking past their interests and what the community may plan to do in escalation if their interests are not met, right? That's one way. And then it also helps us to like more easily move opposition. So sometimes if a district, if they're elected, will never actually ally with us, we can canvass people around them to say, what if you just remain neutral? And sometimes keeping a candidate neutral equally as important as making them put the other side, just so they're not pushing against our issues. And then from there, like, our electeds knowing that maybe one organizer like me actually represents 75 people help them take our interests more seriously. And then canvassing also makes sure that as organizers, we're keeping our demands in line with the community. Because if we lose sight of what they actually want, we lose the ability to appropriately negotiate on their behalf, right? Like when the PFA goes before, like the House, right? They have to make certain negotiations to get it to pass from act to actually be a law. And it helps our legislators know what things the community will be willing to let go of, what things are most important, and to see if the impact of those negotiations are being felt as equitably as possible. So if you canvass over here in Bronzeville, where I live, Bronzeville is a mostly Black area, but it is at a higher income level than people who live in the far, far South. So if we only canvass folks from this area, you would get like a skewed representation compared to like the 6th Ward, 21st Ward. They oftentimes feel that their concerns are not being heard. And through canvassers, hearing their concerns, taking them back, they get a more equal voice within the conversation. Answer your question, Anna?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, cool. How am I doing on time, TAs?
Hey, it's Washika, about 10 more minutes. And then
Okay.
we'll open it up to questions and then the discussion questions that students have asked too.
Okay, great. Okay, some of the ways that y'all can get engaged is finding an organization that's currently canvassing for the PFA. So you live on the Southland, you can definitely engage with Soul. And I'll drop my email in here. Or you can engage with Allie. She is the representative from the People's Lobby, one of our close partners in this work, but they do most work around the north side of Chicago. And then also great ways to get involved is to write your legislator. Like I said before, legislators need constant feedback to stay accountable to what's going on. Some of the legislators who are not as strong allies need to be reminded how many people are watching these issues. And we also want people to raise awareness. Some like canvassing works the best if people feel like you understand their issues and where they're coming from. So the most powerful canvasser will be someone from the area who is well plugged in to the area's issues. So it'll be really difficult for me to canvass like Evanston, right? Even though there are many people out of Evanston who may have similar backgrounds to me, I won't know like that small detail that makes them think that they could be more safe. And it's usually something that's really nuanced. Like on my block, people were really concerned about lighting, right? Even though we had what the city required to be adequate lighting, people constantly were like, it's not enough lights, it's not enough lights, not enough lights. And me being able to know that to be true, because I live here too, helped me land better with my neighbors. Another great thing y'all can do is ask for a teach-in. Many times canvassers feel discouraged to canvass because they didn't know information. And I just want to reemphasize that you don't need like to be a policy expert to canvass. Like truly, most people do not care about the policy. They more so care about how the message is being communicated and if it's speaking to their interests. But we can equip you all to speak more, to feel more confident, honestly, in what you already know to be true. And then that's all I have. Yeah. I recommend mostly that you all plug into the People's Lobby to canvass. They are right now leading a lot of the canvass work. You know, and that's all. I'm ready for questions.
Awesome. So did anybody want to go off mic, and we can probably take one or two people asking questions, and then we can then go into the questions that were posted from the discussion board. So I'll give it a moment for whoever wants to go off mic and start.
Hi, folks. This is Anna again. Again, not a question per se, but I just want to elevate how canvassing is such an integral part of the policy change process. And this is a skill that is extremely transferable. You know, being able to engage with someone that thinks differently than you, that has a different experience and background as you do, and being able to know how to find common ground and connect with them on things that feel important to both of you is something that, you know, will help in so many different parts of your lives, not just in canvassing. But this is how policy change happens. And we're talking about, you know, power informs policy, and power is organized money and organized people. A lot of times the things that we're fighting for to advance health equity, we don't necessarily have the organized money to push that work forward. A lot of times our opponents are the ones that have the organized money, but we do have organized people. And canvassing is a major way that we help to organize people around these issues so that we can build power to advance health equity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so often people don't know where to plug in. Like Anna was saying, like they don't know where to plug in. They feel like they're in an island all by themselves. And just having a canvasser echo for them that people do care about their issues and see them as being a power player within changing their communities, it can raise the morale of the community so high. It can truly like transform a community if you get the right canvas in the right room and make people really talking and moving.
Hi, this is Nancy, Northwest Center. We of course know and value the value of deep canvassing now that I know there's a term for it. I'm curious to see, how do you track this, and how do you you know, and I think about this a lot with our community health workers, because I think there is like a difference in mindset, right? When I'm telling them like, hey, you're getting paid to talk to people, right? And that's something different than the retail or work service work that you've done in the past. And that's one way of having to convince them that that is important work. But I'm sure I have to, as our funding diminishes from some grants, like have to convince other funders that this is effective work. How do you track it, and how do you present it as a value? Because it's something that's not as easily to track, right? As if you just say, I knocked on these doors, but the value of the canvassing itself.
Yes. Okay. So it is a true challenge. And this is like some of my critiques of like the philanthropy complex. It makes it hard to justify and quantitate our work, and that's not fair. But a great way that I think that we do it is we talk about the impact. So if I canvass every day for Budget for Black Lives, I talk about how those canvas experiences turned into testimonies against a specific issue or for a policy. And that can be easy to track. And then typically we're able to explain what the impact was of those testimonies. So for Budget for Black Lives, we were able to get 60 people to show up to an open budget hearing meeting. Typically, Cook County gets zero engagement, right? Like they will have months of board meetings at 10 a.m. on a Thursday, and there will be not a single person in that room. But due to Budget for Black Lives canvassing, we had 60 people show up and say that they want a 911 alternative to mental health response that do not include police. And that was unquestionable impact, right? And then we had the Cook County put into their impact report that due to community voice, AKA Budget for Black Lives, we have made this recommendation. That's one way that we are able to quantify it. We also track through like Minivan, we have surveys that we track people like at the top of the conversation, they might say they are neutral, and by the end, they'll say positive. So we get that hard data there too. We track how many people turn from being canvassed to being members. Yes, thank you, Anna. Mm-hmm. So we kind of like squint and make it work. But really we have to find the funders that know about the history and the importance of canvassing. We hardly ever get funders who need to be truly, truly convinced. They just need to see that we have metrics in place. Yeah, it is hard.
That's helpful, right? We have a variety of them. And so you gave us some good things to think about. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I forgot I was on mute. I was agreeing. I was like, yeah, that's great. I'm just writing down information. We can take one more question from the audience, and then I will begin to read the discussion questions. So does one more person perhaps want to go?
Akeisha, I have a question for you. How do you decide where to canvass?
That's a great question. It's always for a different reason. So when I was canvassing for the PFA, I decided to canvas around Little Village, which is the area that the jail lives within.
Mm.
I chose there because through jail support, I had learned that there were a lot of tensions between the majority Black men who were leaving the jail and the majority Latino community that the jail surrounded. And I was trying to figure out a way to bridge those gaps. Like it is through like, ooh, unfortunately, it's like mini canvassing that leads to bigger canvassing, right? So that's one way. And then other times it's because you want to move a specific legislator. Like if my legislator LG is giving me dust, I'm going to go canvass everybody in his community so I can get people to like, oh, knock on his door and make him feel like he doesn't hear us.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for the question.
On meet again. Thank you all so much for asking the questions. I will start reading the questions from the discussion, and they will also be posted in the chat. So if you do not fully hear what I say, it will be there. So question is, how can we advocate for the communities to understand their power and motivate them to act against what is missing in their neighborhoods, right? Or how can we direct and support them to the potential resources, information, and possible funding and grants available for them to apply to improve their needs? How can we improve their concept about population health and its importance in the most effective way to make them act?
Okay, I'm gonna read it. It's 3 different questions.
It's a multi-question question. And so there are multiple parts. So you can answer in parts, you can try and answer in whole, however you feel most comfortable breaking down the answer to the question.
Okay, I'll go in order. I'm trying to go in order. So for the how can we advocate for communities to understand their power? So we take the approach of like twofold. So in one way, it's about quantity of connects, right? Like there are people out there who already understand their power and just don't know how to access the system. So if I talk to 100 people, honest to God, I might get 5 viable connections. And it's just the you got to just keep talking to people. And then within that, I think helping them to understand how we got to this moment will show them how many systems and people who are currently in power are working to diminish their power, and keeping them understanding like no one diminishes you if it would not matter if you were elevated. So walking them through like examples. So we watch a lot of films of other successful movements. We look to strikes. We look to other places in the world who have successfully led movements. And it just convincing them like through smaller actions. So if they want to eventually, end money bond, we start with maybe getting a stop sign and just seeing how like that individual act like improves community, and then keep repeating it until hopefully we get the big wins. But the win like money bond is the once in a career type of thing, honestly. Okay, second part. How can we direct and support them to potential resources? That one's hard. Like getting regular people grants can be so challenging because y'all know, typically you have to show the impact of the program before people are willing to fund it. It's a little harder for me to answer. Okay, I think how do we improve their concepts? Yeah, okay, I'll get that one next. How do we improve their concept publish up? So I think teach-ins are great tools in finding like real world examples, because oftentimes people, like you said today, people are already doing the thing, just using different vocabulary. So y'all were already being canvassed. Y'all were already being canvassers. You just didn't know because we're like gatekeeping these words from y'all. So making sure people understand the small ways that they're already engaging and then just like posting upon that. Should I go to the next one about how to celebrate the small wins? Okay. It's hard, y'all. Transparently, we get so caught up in the next thing that we forget to acknowledge something that already happened. But we try to acknowledge the small wins through like relationship building. So one of my colleagues is doing environmental justice work, and Water for All did not win the vote. And that was unfortunate, right? But the small win was people came out and they talked about it and they fought for it, So they threw them a little party. And they had the party, we took a day off, and we just said, like, what does this feel like to try to harness our power, and what do we do from here? It was a small celebration. I feel like it mattered. After the PFA, before it was stalled, we just had a dinner and like griped about how hard it was, because we're really relationship focused. So that And then we oftentimes send out like newsletters. We write to the press to like hype our own stuff up. Like we tried everything we can to like document ways that we are winning. Because so oftentimes a small win may be followed by a pushback. But keeping folks like engaged in the work in the long term is our ultimate goal.
Hey, let me find. So the other one was, I agree with the idea that community members likely have valuable ideas and could have wonderful changes if given a platform. Although I wonder how the politicalization of healthcare in our society post-COVID would play into the idea that local health departments should be accountable communities. Right. The authors state that this should not mean the abandonment of expertise, but I wonder how that could be managed practically. Like what systems could sort out the Parks for All contingent from the ivermectin contingent, or really any group advocating for a practice that goes against scientific evidence in a way that both seems fair and is fair. Wow.
Yeah, let me read it.
Again, it's another, in-depth question that does really want to know about striking the balance between the community's desires and things that are helpful and healthful for the wellness of the community. Great question.
Yeah, my instinct is going towards getting their buy-in. Like we know, like when we're trying to get people to do something that benefits the overall health, every single person is not going to feel heard or represented or taken into consideration. But having like a mechanism in place that ensures a wide range of perspectives being brought to the table, I think it had people feel like they were talked to and were invested in, even though they didn't get what they want in the end. Let me just read it one more time to make sure I'm getting everything. Yeah, that's a hard one. This little piece at the end, like any group advocating for a practice that goes against scientific evidence. That I don't know. Yeah.
Or perhaps it really is about even like, choosing what communities to work with, right? Maybe that means that perhaps this is not a community that you would work with. Like it's not about working against a person, but just not working with them, right? You'll work with a community that not only aligns with what you are doing, but also your values. Like for instance, so I know is faith-based, right? So, maybe you want to work with other faith-based organizations. There is actually, and I know this is slightly off topic, there's a group called Working Together Jackson. And there are a number of churches and mosques and other houses of worship, and they have their leadership come together to help look at different issues that are happening in Jackson, Mississippi. And they were actually able to help restructure, have a huge hand in restructuring the K through 12 system and how the K through 12 system worked, how accountability worked, and many other things by building a coalition with other faith-based organizations and leveraging their collective power. And they actually have they came up with like these group guidelines that also include accessibility because a number of members are disabled. And that is one of the things that drew me to that group. They believe, their faith brings them to these ideas of equity and accessibility and accommodations. And that comes directly from the members. So it's a ground up thing. Yes. Yeah. So yeah. And I've met members of the organization and that's what they do. And they also have helped other smaller, I'll get your question in a second. They've also helped other smaller businesses, like small businesses that have helped ameliorate food deserts. So they help support them. They do buy-ins and they remind people, oh, hey, make sure you support this small business in this neighborhood where there was a food desert so that we can kind of help with those issues too. I'm sorry, Anna, what were you going to say?
I was just going to build on Akeisha's answer to the question about the politicization and how do you, have fairness in an organizing world where people are actively organizing misinformation or falsehoods or other things that, detract from the public's health. And I think it's important for everybody to acknowledge that opposition they are organized. They are using the same tactics. They are out there canvassing. They are out there packing school board meetings. So in some ways, there's opportunity to learn from their rather effective tactics to, help apply them to our purposes and the causes that we care for. But that's why it is so important to actively organize. There's often a expression that's used in elections like, oh, we out-organized them. So being able to build a bigger and stronger and more powerful coalition that can help combat some of that misinformation, using tactics that are just, that are right, that are community centric is one way to combat that. And, you know, as with any election or any political issue, you never try to change up people that are staunchly opposed to what you're doing. It's not worth your energy. It's not worth your time. No one's minds are going to be changed. You're trying to, you know, help talk to people that are in the middle, that can be swayed. So that's, you know, it is a balance, but it is important to recognize that both sides use the same tactics. So that's why we have to make sure that we are organized ourselves so that we can, you know, meet them on a level playing field.
That's great. I know Nancy had a question, and there was another one in the chat that I thought was also very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know the heart of the question that was asked. I want to assume best intentions, but I, as a community worker working on the Healthy Chicago Equity Zones project, you know, that is centering residents to name the health issues that they have and then create their own community health needs assessment. I feel a little bit nervous about this, like navigating this, because I know that like the people in our communities who are vaccine hesitant, you know, they were vaccine hesitant, yes, but they also had experienced really negative things with the government. So like my one of our teammates' grandmothers was affected by the birth control trials in Puerto Rico. Like that was in her generation. And so she had very much reason to distrust the government and not necessarily the science. So I just want to like name that. I feel nervous about that question. So I'm curious to see, like, based on like that little tidbit, like, does that change a little bit of the answer if you were to see that angle?
I think that, yeah. So yes. Real. Yeah, we had a similar problem with rates of vaccinations amongst folks on the far south side, and they're mostly citing like Tuskegee as their reasoning, and then general distrust of healthcare, right? And then just constant, even outside of like Tuskegee, as like Medicaid recipients, a lot of them are saying they were getting trash healthcare. They oftentimes felt ignored by the healthcare providers. Oftentimes felt like they were just getting not great services. So we didn't engage this, but when we talked about it as a team, we talked about the importance of simply not throwing folks away who are vaccine hesitant. Like we can't say if you're not going to get, if you're not going to get right, you got to get left, right? And making sure that if we were going to engage, we were going to demand of our legislators to put into place like safety measures that would hold people who were never going to get vaccinated. Like we cannot assume that everyone's ever going to comply, and they still matter. Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that, whoever that was. Nancy.
Nancy, yeah. Thank you so much. I think that was also really important. There was another one that was what happens when you counter an opposing someone who's opposed or doing something in opposition to your canvassing. I didn't see that question, but I think that that's also really a really interesting question as well.
It happens all the time, y'all. Like I said before, people have their takes, and occasionally I do run into people who are on the opposite side and actively engaged on the opposite side organizing.
Mm-hmm.
And I play it by ear. So I give y'all a little scenario. So, but somebody who's actively against what I'm doing, like they actually are like, I want more cops, I want more jail, I don't care about Black Lives Matter, nah. I just close the door, right? Like I have to recognize that time's a limited resource. And like every moment I spend with somebody who I cannot move, I miss somebody who I could move, for just having that discernment. But then if it's somebody who I think ultimately would share my values, I try to lean in. Like occasionally with people who have experienced crime, specifically violent crime, occasionally their first instinct is to say, no, I wish I would have had cops there in the situation. And I try to lean into them and try to figure out like what can we find that is on the same page, and then pointing them to resources that share their vision. Like there's a whole group of canvassers who specialize in abolitionist practices for folks who have experienced crime directly. And they come in with a whole different lens. So really under like open heart, listening, trying to identify who's movable, who's against, who's playing devil's advocate, and who actually would be an asset to your team if you had them on there. And then sometimes that requires a follow-up, right? Like so many people on the far south side where we work are, to put it plainly, used by politicians to further their messages. So they only see them in times like this, but they're not going to be there in May, right? And we have to like differentiate ourselves from those people and continuously have another touch. And usually after a couple of touches, we're able to clearly identify, are they truly oppositional or are they just defensive, rightfully? Like, who are you coming into my home, asking questions about my safety, right? And just like recognizing that. Does that answer the question? Anything more you want?
No, I think I would add that I've been in groups where people we share very similar identities and experiences, and that has happened, right? Not through canvassing, but through someone who I have a very deep racial or gendered connection with. And we do have opposing ideas, like something happened to someone in their family, and if it weren't for the police, right, the community just was not there for this person if it weren't for the police. So I think understanding not just why someone, like someone's opinion, but where it's coming from, because there are people who will argue in bad faith. And like you said, you close the door, metaphorically, not necessarily, but like you close the door and then you go, okay, it's not even about agreeing to disagree. It's about just separating yourself, because again, just like we learned in the last few weeks, lessons, healing from these kinds of things is very important, right? So if it is not serving you and if it's a detriment to you, then you need to step away. So I think that that's really important. And so the last question we will get into real quick is also a bit long one. It says, I believe the notion of the article was power within the community is something that will empower people to take their own health back. Would community building of, for instance, gardens or park areas be beneficial to areas that do not receive as much investment? What would upkeep of these areas consist of? Of course, this is not the overarching solution to an issue, but it would be a step in the right direction. What more can communities do to push for better access to health foods and job opportunities in their communities to pay enough to buy healthy food options? What do incremental changes towards something like that look like? The problem just appears to be so multi-layered that the solution would be to occur over generations to see a positive outcome.
Great question. Hope I can give a solid answer. Okay, so I think it really comes down to the people who are most impacted by the issues keeping on the people who have the power, the electeds, right? Like a lot of times, people who are most deeply impacted, when they try to like solve a problem, the people in power try to nitpick every solution they put out, right? As if those who are oppressed and marginalized have to now be the experts in cultivating the solution, and they don't. That is the job of the county. That is the job of the government. That is job, whoever's job is, that's their job. So I think it is raising the issues, staying on them so they commit to a change, and then making sure those in power know that it is their duty to like be the architects of the solution and make it happen. And they can put in like incremental changes in the meantime, but overall, just being clear on what the demand is. Does that make sense? Do you want to add anything, TAs? I can give an example as well.
I think, well, I actually made a comment was that complex problems require complex solutions. Like we didn't get to these issues overnight. There were systematic things that happened over generations that got us to where we are, right? And I think that that is something that, like for instance, I don't have children, right? But I still want a better future for the people who are here after me, right? And a lot of people who do have children, that's what they want, right? So you want to say, you know, yes, it will not get solved now, but you don't plant the seed the same day you're going to eat the fruit, right? You plant that seed and then it grows and you harvest it and you water it, and that is for future people. And so like they say, what was it? The best time to plant a tree is yesterday. The second best time is today. So you're planting those roots. And if you look at any successful project that has been happening, that is sustained or sustainable or has sustainably been built into it to help combat these issues, there are generations that have happened. That's why you have longitudinal studies. So in public health and also in disability studies and different things, you have longitudinal studies that follow things over the course of years. And you can see how these things were a detriment over the course of years and decades and generations, and how information campaigns and other things have helped fix it. One big thing would be the stigma around like HIV and AIDS, right? That is taking so many generations for people to come to terms and understand, and all of these different things have happened to help not only with public information, but health and wellness and other things like that. And in some places, of course, a lot of stigma still exists, but because of generations of people working, you know, to combat misinformation, to help people, it has changed how people have access to information and what is happening for the better, right? So I think that, well, it's a great note to end on, right? To just remember that these things will take change, but that's why we're all here, right? We're here. Sometimes we are the seeds that are planted to move forward. So I would love to thank Akeisha and Anna as well. Oh, sorry. Was there something else? I'm sorry.
So as you're talking, I was like, yes, yes, yes. And just add a little bit too, like, also people should not take the scraps. Like, I think it's important for the community to hold the lines that they want to have. Like, again, with the PFA, they try to use the excuse of things being incremental and not being too radical to gut and chop and chop and chop and chop to where we decided what they gave us, we would have been so far from the original goal, which was to abolish money bond. So don't let them use the excuse of things being incremental to gut what you want and what you know that you need, and don't take the scraps. Yeah. Keep fighting. Keep fighting.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So again, we would like to thank our speaker, Akeisha, and Anna as well. Thank you for helping to give us some depth and impact. And yes, I do want to make 2 announcements. If you are going to the rally or at the rally, that is an action lab. If you did not go to the rally, it is a speaker reflection. So just letting you know. Oh, thank you. Caesar is there. And for those of us who are joining us for the second half, we will not really have much of a break. We do want to get into the session and we have to talk about the final paper. But thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate you all. And thank you again to our speakers for really helping us to reify and engage in the material and the kind of purposefulness of the class.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. All right.